that procurement pressure is kind of sheltering the farm gate price.
We actually saw the sale yards kick into gear.
Some real good bargains to be had, not that vendors probably want to hear that.
You're losing 10, 20 cents a kg instantly if you're going through the yards anyway.
Hello and welcome to AgriHQ+A, brought to you by the AgriHQ Market Analysts and Global HQ. I'm Nicola Dennis and I take care of the weekly livestock insight reports. We're going to be joined shortly by our sale yard expert, Suz Bremner, who manages the Livestock Eye Reports, and the Master of Predictions, Mel Croad, who writes the Livestock Outlook forecasts. So we sat down for a bit of a chat about the year that is almost done, and since the theme was 2020, it is only fitting that we came up against a lot of technical difficulties recording this week's episode. But no matter, it is here now for your enjoyment. If you're listening to this episode via podcast, good on you. We hope that you're enjoying your drenching or gardening or whatever it is you happen to be doing. If you're watching this via Facebook or YouTube, shackled to the computer, then you should know that we have made the conscious decision to limit your screen time. To hear the whole conversation, subscribe to AgriHQ and one of many podcast apps available for your device, and you will get all the episodes for free on your phone the minute they drop. All right, let's kick back and dig up some repressed memories.
We didn't really have any inkling of what was to come, right at the beginning of the year, and then roll on nearly 12 months. It's certainly a year that'll go down in history for probably all the wrong reasons, but it'll be one that goes down in history.
That being said, there were so many times when the wheels almost completely fell off and they didn't. Like, it's been a real cliffhanger year. So we had China fall out of the market. Well, we had China leave the market as they always do at the end of Chinese New Year buying, and we're going to see that again this year. But then we had this coronavirus thing, shipping, storage, major slowdowns, but we had those other markets going still. And then those other markets were affected, but then China came back in. And then in a similar vein, when we were going into winter, nobody had any spare feed. And we just thought, crap, this is going to be hell. But then winter was mild.
I think you could almost say that we sort of had 5 or 6 seasons rolled into 5 or 6 months, really. We dealt with a lot between January and May. And like you say, hindsight's a great thing. We sit here in December and we look back and we did actually get through it okay. There were points there through those 5 or 6 months where, you're right, we all thought the wheels were coming off. But I think we've possibly learnt a lot from what we endured through those months in terms of the industry itself, in terms of export markets, how we're now, I feel like we're way more aligned with market conditions than what we've seen in previous years, where procurement would just push us way out to unrealistic positions in terms of prices, and then would have to react just as quickly, and much like what we saw last December. So I think, there has actually been some positives out of what has occurred through the start of this year, that's for sure.
I think for me, obviously, a lot of my work is based around the sale yards, and that was a horrible day when we found out that all the sale yards were going to shut down, something that's never happened before in the history of New Zealand. But for me, it cemented how important those sale yards are to our country and our industry, in setting those benchmarks. There was the opportunity for online trading to really take over, and for some companies that's been really successful and carries on today. But that absolutely, that rocked everyone when the sale yards closed. And in the first 4 weeks, everyone was a bit shell-shocked. We didn't know where prices were going. And then in the last sort of 2 weeks, when it was, talked about that they'd reopen in level 2, we just went into that sort of no man's land where everything just sort of, remember that time, everything just sort of sat and waited until we could get some benchmarks. And it took a couple of weeks, but it certainly, brought everything sort of back into line and just gave, I think, a little bit more confidence to people to where prices should have been. So
we saw, because it was right on that weaner calf season, and we
sort of. So yes, for the South Island it was. We got through quite a few of the weaner fairs in the North Island, but it certainly hit hit the South Island hard at that time of year. But it wasn't only the calves though. That's a pretty busy time to be selling lambs as well. So yeah, it really did cause a few issues, but
We
got
certainly
through it.
saw a reaction in the store lamb prices once the sale yards were back, because they were at a
Yes.
pretty depressed level and they were coming south. And then we sort of saw the North Islanders start to fight the South Island buyers for that stuff.
But that was where, prices kind of just sort of stagnated there for a while. And then I think we saw a lift of about 40 cents a kilo, if I remember rightly, when the sale yards came back on stream on those lambs.
Some of the lessons learnt through that period has possibly seen a restructuring to farm policies in terms of not being heavily reliant on any one market, be it store or slaughter. And I think we're seeing that now, and I think we'll continue to see it next year in terms of changes that are made. I mean, you look at, if we even step aside from COVID for a minute, last January there were 4-week backlogs to get cattle killed through January and February, purely because of the drought starting to hit and everyone having held off killing through December because the prices were at record levels. Now, what we've seen in the last month is still a fairly sustained cattle kill, yet for prime steers and heifers, yet we've had phenomenal volumes of 2-year-old cattle coming through the store market. And essentially, I mean, if you joined dots, it's potentially those cattle that would have been offloaded in January are now actually entering those store markets earlier, and people are just looking at different ways of mitigating risks and steering clear of being heavily stocked up heading into summer. I mean, okay, we're all looking a bit different this summer, but I think we're going to see some real changes in how those farming policies are structured.
It's not just the store cattle markets. We're seeing a lot of 5-year-old ewes, your cast for age ewes coming forward into the prime markets at the moment, and a lot of them would usually be held off until sort of February or end of January, February. I think people perhaps are a bit more savvy with making these decisions and making them quickly.
And that comes back to the consistency that we're seeing in the farm gate prices at a slaughter level. We're not getting the peaks and troughs. We've basically, if you look at some of those AgriHQ graphs on slaughter for beef and lamb, they've been pretty flat. And when I say flat, at a reasonable level since May. We haven't seen prices skyrocket high and then react by falling. So it's given some assurity to what to expect at a slaughter level, which has allowed, some of that to flow through into the store markets. But I do feel that overall farmers are still lacking confidence as to what the market could look like in 4 to 8 weeks, because we're on the cusp of that 12-month mark of getting back to where we were, and everything just sort of fell out of the sky January, February onwards. So I think once we get past almost the 1st of February and we haven't had, another pandemic or another COVID, I think I would like to see that there's some confidence return to the marketplace. And I think we'll be a lot better to adapt to anything that comes our way. You only have to look, there's the COVID vaccines being rolled out in the UK as of today. So I think we're moving onwards and upwards. But there does still seem to be that lack of confidence at the farm gate. If you looked at all the outlooks and insights leading through late 2019, demand going forward into this year, had COVID not happened, was still looking really strong. So, and we've come through COVID okay as a country and as an industry, given that we've all said it could have been a lot worse. So if we can get these vaccines up and running, and if we can put sort of COVID to one side, you'd have to say that, the red meat demand should start to pick back up again. But it's just that confidence and that long-term game with sheep that just seems to be putting a lot of people off them. Brexit, I mean, you look at all the info coming out of the UK right now, and nothing's looking good there. And so I think, we're going to get caught up in some sort of turmoil there. What that means for import or export demand into those markets is still up in the air. It's probably certainly way down the list for the UK EU, but it's probably top of the list for New Zealand to understand how those two markets are going to operate next year. And we have seen a greater reliance on those markets this year with the emergence of COVID. We have sort of returned to some of those traditional retail markets, which again has allowed our exports to continue to move a lot more smoother than we probably anticipated earlier in the year. So we don't want to be writing those markets off. Sure, they're not as big as what they were 5 to 10 years ago, but we need to have that diversification in our export markets so that we can spread those risks, that if we are going to see these jolts in market access and market demand, we can hopefully move product to other markets and not really feel too much of a negative impact. So yeah, I think that Brexit is definitely something that is going to have quite a bit of an influence and say in the next wee while, that's for sure.
Yeah, and if we've got Chinese New Year buying ending early and then an early Easter buying season, that's kind of seems like that's almost ideal if we're knocking straight into January and into chilled lamb. That seems like one of the saving graces.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people misunderstood the position of China late last year in terms of they felt that it was China ramping everything up and then just simply turned off the tap and were playing some games. But it is just a definite switch off when we get to Chinese New Year or a month out from Chinese New Year. So it's not something to be concerned about necessarily. It's just learning to deal with their buying changes at this time of the year. And I think exporters have got that down pat and we understand it, but it's some of the, farmers that may not have understood that so clearly last year, just to be aware that it is going to happen again, but it shouldn't have the big negatives because we haven't seen those prices in our export markets ramp up to artificial and unsustainable levels. So we should get through it a lot smoother this year, I think, and that should hopefully give some relief to farmers heading into 2021, January, February. I mean, you look at the crops around everywhere across the country that have gone in for mitigating drought issues. They are going to need stock on them at some point. So I think, I'm quietly confident that we should be turning a corner heading into early next year, albeit void of any repeat of COVID lockdowns and closures and market access. My crystal ball's not quite that good, but that's gut feel at this stage.
AgriHQ+A was brought to you by Global HQ, who are the publishers of Farmers Weekly, Dairy Farmer Magazine, On Farm Story, Sarah's Country, and of course, AgriHQ. This episode was edited by Hustle Funkin' Media.